Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome back onto the show Marine veteran, adaptive athlete, and author of Put Your Legs On, Rob Jones. Now, in this second conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from his experience through the pandemic, climbing one world trade, competing in the Paralympics, farming, fatherhood, leadership, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of over 1,200 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I welcome back onto the show Rob Jones. Enjoy. Well, Rob, I want to start by saying welcome back. The first time we sat down was episode 67, which was January 2018, so 8 years ago now. It's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, it's incredible. Now, we've seen each other at World Trade, which we'll get to recently at Echelon Front. But I want to start talking about your experience during the pandemic. And the reason I say that, with this whole conversation, wherever people stood in the very kind of polarizing conversations that were going on there, as we emerged out the back end, there were some incredibly important lessons that were disregarded that I think it's irresponsible not to revisit. And I'm talking about, the health of the nation, et cetera, et cetera. So you were on a farm by that point. So what was your unique pandemic experience?
My unique pandemic experience started, I was actually running for Congress, I wasn't even running for Congress yet. I was running for the Republican nomination to run for Congress in my district. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot that you can go into about that. It's probably a whole podcast, but ultimately I didn't win that race. And I'm glad that I made the attempt, because I think that if you want to see change in the government, especially, you got to be willing to put yourself out there as a person that can try and create that change. So I'm glad I tried, but at the same time, I'm also glad I didn't win, because the whole time I did it, I felt very, very, very out of place doing that. Just didn't feel like something I would want to do. And I think that what I do at Echelon Front now is infinitely more impactful than anything I could have done as a part of that crazy body of individuals. So that's kind of how it started. And then also my unique story of the pandemic was my son had been born February of 2020. So, there's a lot of things that it affected with that, the inability to rely upon other people, rely upon your village of people to help you with, having a new baby. So that affected things. And then, what else did I do during the pandemic? Well, when I lost the race in Congress and kind of went like, that's when I started writing this memoir. I'm sure we're going to talk about. That's when I started writing in earnest on the memoir. I had already done some pages, but that's when I started writing, every single day, making sure I wrote 1,000 words or a couple pages or whatever I could muster that day. That's when I started writing that. And that's also when I started trying to get back into motivational speaking a little bit. And obviously the pandemic really affected that heavily. I think I did one virtual event in all of 2021 combined. So that was something I was doing, and by getting back into virtual or motivational speaking, kind of led me to the Echelon Front pathway in the end. But yeah, I mean, and being on a farm really was a positive for us because we didn't have to worry about food. We had all the food we could, all the good, healthy food that we could have. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff, but those are kind of the highlights, I would say.
It's something that seems to be evident of an area that needs to be changed. That someone who would be a good leader that we know, and I've had this conversation with so many of my friends, when they get into this world, they're turned off by it or they're not successful. And if we go to the macro level, if we're talking about the presidential campaign, I've always said the problem that we have at the moment is it's not everyone can compete in that game. It's a demostocracy. You've got to be incredibly wealthy, millionaire or billionaire, and arguably you've got to be devoid of ethics because you are taking money from companies that are lining your pockets that then you're going to do favors for when you get in. So not truly a democratic process. But that's not what I don't believe what, the founding fathers envisioned as far as a political process. So going back down to the experience that you had now, what was some of the cons of the path that you took, even if you lost to another incredible leader and it was a great environment, but what were the things that you didn't like, and if you were king for a day, what would we change so that we would allow all of the right kind of people to actually succeed in these political spaces?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's a big question. For my own experience, what I didn't like about it was especially the primary process tends to pre-select for people that are a little bit more on the extreme of either side. So when you're running a primary in a government, for federal office, you have to be able to win the primary, and the way that you win the primary is by winning over the people that are going to vote in the primary. And the people that are going to vote in the primary are the ones that are 100% hardcore for that political party. They're either hardcore Republican or they're hardcore Democrat, and they want to hear the more hardcore talking points of that platform, of the general platform. And so in order to do that, you spend a lot of time talking to people that are hardcore on that side. And so for me, it was really hard because I'm not really, I wouldn't say I'm a hardcore person on either side. Uh, I think back then I probably identified more with the Republican Party, and that's why I picked that as a party to run with. I probably identified with more of their beliefs, but that didn't mean that I, was in line with everything that they were saying or everything that anybody says really. So I found myself in this kind of a tough position of trying to win the primary, and there's a certain thing you have to do in order to win the primary, but at the same time also trying to balance that with why I ran in the first place, which was to just be to show people that a good person can be in Congress and not get corrupted and can make the right decisions on behalf of everybody instead of themselves. And so there was this balance, and there was a battle going on between me and the people that were helping me run the campaign. So they had the kind of a formula that they would always plug things into. And the general formula when you're running a campaign is, you tweet a picture of the other person like mid sentence, like, so they look stupid. You know what I mean? It's like every single one, just like that. So they look mean, and it's black and white, and it's red letter. You know what I mean? It's like the same thing. And so that's kind of so they would be tweeting out all that stuff, and that's not who I wanted to be. So it was a real struggle to balance letting them put stuff out with having to check everything with me first, but also make sure the stuff that they were putting out reflected me as why I was running in the first place, which was to unify as opposed to divide. And so I think the one thing that worked the best was I said, hey, if the picture that you're putting up or the post that you're putting up is designed to cause any kind of emotion like anger, sadness, fear, anything like that, don't post it. So only post things that are going to make people feel good or unified or these kinds of things. Have an open mind. and that's a really hard way to run a campaign in a primary. So I think if I were to go back and do it again, I probably would have tried just to run as an independent and just be like, offer myself up as an option, do the best I could, and say, this is me, this is what I'm trying to do, and just be more pure to myself, and just say, this is what I think, instead of I kind of felt like I was having to hide some of the things that I thought, or maybe not that I had to. I didn't have to. I could have done the same thing as a Republican nominee, but I felt back then I had convinced myself that I kind of had to hide a little bit of what I believed so that I would win. And so that was not the way that I wanted to do it. And so I would advise myself back then just to run as a Republican again, but just share what you believe and just let the cards fall as they may. So that was my personal experience. And if I was king for a day, what I would do is I would try and convince people. I would convince more people to be involved in the primary process, because there's tons of what you would call just regular people that don't necessarily fall on either side of the aisle in a hardcore way that could potentially go and vote in primaries across the country, but they don't, because they don't want to go and put their lot for. They just don't care enough in the primary process. So that's what I would try and do. I would just try and say, hey, everybody, we gotta, if you want a normal person to be running for a position in the government, then normal people have to go and vote. People that aren't extreme have to go and vote. And so that's what I would try and do. I would try and convince more people that are kind of like you and me, balanced on either side and just have an open mind. I would try and convince those people to go and vote in primaries so that we could select people that would get to a position where they're the candidate. The power is with us. The power is with the individuals that are voting. It's just not enough of them really do it, and we need more people that are willing to look outside of just these two options.
I've always said that a leader unites and a tyrant divides, and yet it's the tyranny side that seems to be the political strategy these days. And it's sad, because if you think about it, 330 million people in this country, say I'm a Republican, you're a Democrat, or whatever, insert two different parties here, and we run against each other for the presidency, and you win. Everyone that was voting for me really should be like, well, it's a shame because we like James's just a little bit more, but Rob's a good human too, and he's not too far from us, so we're happy either way. That's in theory, that's what we should have, but we have the complete opposite, where it's like World War I, and if your side didn't win, then it was rigged, and you go break into government buildings, or whatever the thing is, rather than going, okay, well, there's three great people running. Whoever wins, at least we're going to have a great leader at the helm of our country. And I think it's completely backwards at the moment.
Yeah, I haven't really thought about this tons. And I'd really have to sit down and think about it and write some stuff out and kind of flesh out some ideas on this. But I do think that there's a large component of why that is because the divisive language, I think it tends to feed our natural tendency as humans to want to exclude, exclude other people, or be certain about things. There's some primal instincts that what they're doing feeds, and the people that are involved in doing the most of the voting, the primaries and that kind of stuff, those people are probably a little bit more susceptible to those primal instincts. So when you have a certain candidate say exactly what that person wants to hear, it kind of snowball effect. It amplifies what they're thinking, and they're drawn to that person. Whereas another person that doesn't get involved in primaries and isn't as susceptible to those primal instincts, it doesn't affect them as much. So I kind of think that's part of a big part of the reason. And there's other stuff associated with it too. But I think if I had to think about it from just my perspective as a regular voter at this point, I think that's what I see. I think I see people have natural tendencies that cause them to, want to feel angry, want to be divisive, and want all these things, and want to have certainty about and stuff in situations where there really isn't any certainty. People will kind of seek that stuff out, and we're not detaching from that, and we're just following that, and that's how certain people get selected. So I think there's a big component of that there. And I don't, obviously I don't know exactly what everything that's going on. It's a very, very complex situation, but I do think that there's something there about natural human tendencies that are feeding this little situation that we have.
It's interesting because it's the tribalism that can be positive or negative, as people say.
Yeah, well, yeah, your tribe is the best. The other tribe is evil. That's kind of what cave that the prime that's the primal instinct. And then also the certainty aspect of it too, I think, is people don't like living in uncertainty. I don't like being uncertain about something. And if there's something that's happening and I can't figure out in my mind what do I think about that? And you just have to live in that kind of uncertain place. That's not a good place to live. So even though you don't have all the evidence, you just kind of graft onto something that feels like it should be right, and then when you do that, you graft onto it, your mind closes and you don't consider anything else because you're just clinging on to that certainty. And we have to be able to let go of those two things, let go of the need for certainty, and be happy with a little bit of uncertainty in our lives, and also recognize that the tribe that we're a part of is the entire country. That's the tribe. Or I mean, humanity is our tribe, so we have to recognize that. But those are very powerful primal instincts, and it's really hard if you're not thinking about it, just give into it.
Yeah. One of my guests a few weeks ago said, I think he was quoting someone else, but it was you've got two types of people. You've got civilians and you've got citizens. And he said,
"Oh, is that a Starship Troopers thing?"
It might be. I don't know. I'm not sure where it was from, but it's a great concept because a civilian just lives in the country. And like you said, that's probably the kind of person that then is looking for guidance and then grabbing onto, one side or the other. A citizen is investing into their country, and they're a first responder or a military member or a teacher or a nurse or just a good person in their community. And I think that's a really good question to look in the mirror and ask yourself, am I a citizen or am I a civilian? Am I just paying my taxes and using the assets of this country and not really putting much in? Or am I trying to go above and beyond because I care enough about my community and my country? And yeah, I'll even have the hard conversations when things that are happening around me are wrong as well. My moral compass, my moral courage. But I thought that was a really interesting way of looking at it. The danger is that we all become simply civilians and then we get told what to do. And that's kind of, nationalism over patriotism then. A patriot is someone who actually invests in their country rather than just mindlessly follows a tribe.
Yeah, well, you gotta be involved. You gotta take ownership of the things that affect your life, your mission. And if you give it up, if you're not going to go and vote or research the candidate that you like or do all these different things, then yeah, you're going to be getting led around. You're going to have some stuff. Other people are going to go ahead and do that, and then you're going to lose control. So if you want to see your country or your community be what you want it to be, you have to be involved. You have to take ownership of making that happen. But yeah, I think that I remember that quote reminds me of that scene in the Starship Troopers movie where it's in the very beginning and they're talking. I think the teacher's in the front and he goes, "What's the difference between a citizen and a civilian?" And then the main character says basically what you said, I think. So I wonder if that came from the book Starship Troopers.
Yeah, it could be. It could be. Interesting.
Good. I like it.
The quote from.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, well, going to the farming for a second. So what made you even decide to get the farm in the first place? And then knowing, I grew up on a farm myself, so knowing how challenging farms can be with two biological legs still, what have been some of the challenges for you working on the farm?
What kind of farm did you grow up on?
So my dad was a horse veterinary surgeon. So we had stables, but then we also had sheep and poultry and other things. So it
Yeah,
was
you're English. You had
about
sheep for
60
sure.
acres that we had. So big enough to have to work the entire childhood, put it that way.
Yeah, yeah. I grew up on a horse farm too, 300 acres, and yeah, lots of horse stall cleaning and things like that. I bet we talked about it on the first podcast. But the way that the farm happened, I just want to be clear. My wife is the farmer. She does all the farming. I help her from time to time with if she needs my help. At this point, she doesn't need it nearly as often as before because she's got part-time employees. She's got farm employees. She's grown the business. But we own 13 acres. And the way that it came about was my wife, Pam, she was a Paralympic gold medalist, two-time Paralympic gold medalist. And while she was rowing, she recognized that in order to be at her highest performance level, she had to eat good, clean food in order to be her greatest self, her greatest rower that she could possibly be. And so when she was thinking about what she wanted to do after rowing, that feeling really resonated with her, that she wanted to live a life that allowed her to be her best self, which meant that she had to eat the healthiest food possible. And one of the problems with eating the healthiest food possible is when you get it from another source, it's really hard to know exactly what they're doing with it. You don't know a lot of the time because it's coming from some unknown person. It just comes from some farm that you never met the person before, and you don't know how they raise things. And even they put it on the label, unless it's like the term organic is on the label. There's a lot of industry. There's a lot of marketing terms that end up on food labels like natural or all natural or pasture raised or what is it, cage free, all this different things. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. And so I think what she realized was that if she wanted to be certain that she was getting the best food possible, she needed to grow it herself. And so that's what she wanted to do. And so she learned and she went to some courses about how to raise sheep, and she did some hands-on stuff with that. And then when she moved over here to America in 2017, she got a job at a vegetable farm near us, and she learned a lot there. And eventually her and a friend that worked there together decided that they were going to start a farm on our property. But that was kind of the motivation for her, is that taking ownership of your food source. If you want to have the best food possible, you have to take ownership of it. So which means you have to know what's going into your food, how it's raised, what did it get fed, all these different things. You have to know that in order to really take full ownership, extreme ownership of your food. And she decided to go ahead and do the route where she's the one that's growing it. But not everybody has to grow their own food. You at least have to go and find out how this stuff gets raised, how your food's getting raised, and buy the stuff that is you have a relationship with the farmer. You know what their terms mean, how they raise things. You know them as a person. You know that they're honest. All these different things that you can trust what they're telling you.
So which animals and poultry do you have now?
So Pam does vegetables. This is the primary farm component. And then, so she sells at the farmer's market, and she has essentially, it's called a CSA, but it's essentially a weekly subscription for people. They have a little farm shop at the end of our driveway. And then animal side, they have they have egg laying hens. And then every year she does between 60 and 100 meat chickens. And then we have a bunch of lamb. She raises lamb and slaughters lamb. Every now and then we'll have pigs. She does turkeys from time to time, and then we have one cow at a time that we raise.
Brilliant. So talk to me then. What did that look like during COVID? So when everyone was scrambling for toilet paper and the abattoirs had a bottleneck from the mega farms, what were you experiencing with your family at that time?
I'm trying to remember. In COVID, I don't think that she had the meat side of it yet. I'm trying to remember. The meat side of it didn't come until later. But yeah, I mean, during COVID, guess what? Farmers markets weren't running. So, they had to shift. That's why part of the reason why they shifted to the CSA, subscription model. They shifted over that way even more because the farmers markets weren't happening. And another way that it affected us was, it's really hard to farm with a baby. and it's also really hard to so it's really hard to farm with a baby. So that meant I spent the vast majority of my time when I was making campaign calls. I would have Harry on my shoulder taking a nap, and I'd be making calls like, "Hey, you want to donate to my campaign? No, bye. Hey, you want to donate to my campaign? No, bye." Hey, I was doing that and talking to people while holding a sleeping baby, and then every now and then I go, "Hey, do you want to?" And he would start crying. I go, "Oh yeah, that's my son." And I'd have to get up and walk him around doing the calls. So it was just really hard to get to form that community that we could rely upon to take a little bit of the childcare burden away, so that we could do other work. Have being a parent is work, but do other work. So we had to work together as a team in order to do that. She would do her part as well. On the other days of the week, and it required a lot of teamwork between the two of us to make that functional. But the farm, yeah, I mean that was the main effect on the farm would be had to shift the way that the farm was selling its produce, and then childcare with working parents is always a challenge.
And what about as far as the amputee side? What's been challenging when you are having to work on the farm?
Yeah, one of the things I had to do with the farm, with having property and being a parent and being a dad, was figure out a different leg solution. So, uh, every activity that I take part in requires essentially a slightly different kind of leg setup. So before I became a dad and before I moved on and had land, living in apartments and stuff, I could just have my walking legs, my X4s that would have liners and all this stuff that goes on them, and they have knees and do all these things. I'd have my legs for the sports that I did, and then I would just have what I called house legs, which are legs that don't have a liner; they just pop on and off. And I would spend a lot of my day in those because I would just be doing. If I was training for a sport, I would go out and do the training. I'd get back and I would just hang out at my house, and I would take my legs off, put my house legs on, and I could just walk around my house as needed. And then when I sat back down, I'd take them off, so I'd be very comfortable. But when you're a parent, you don't really sit down a lot, because your kids they always need something. And also when you have property, there's a lot of stuff you have to do out on the property that having the bionic knees is just not a good. It's not. I'm not really able to do it very well. Like I can't really effectively chainsaw a log in X4s. It's not happening because of the various balance aspects of it. And just being around on really undulating, really rough terrain, and those legs makes it so that it's really hard to do. So eventually I had to figure out, I had to go back to shorties, which is something I started in. That's what I learned how to walk in, which is just a short, straight leg, but it has liners. It was what my house legs were, but now it has liners and stuff. So I had to go back to that. I had to figure out, a good system to be able to go outside, come back in, and not bring a bunch of mud in the house. So, all these different things I had to craft essentially a leg setup for the way that my life was. And it took me a little while to figure out what it was. And so I would get blisters a lot when I was first became a dad, because I would wear the house legs, and they move around a little bit more. They cause more skin irritation. So, but now I'm at a pretty good spot now where I have a really good leg system in place. So that was one thing from an amputee perspective. And yeah, it's just a little bit more challenging to do the things that you need to do when you have property. Not having the lower halves of your legs plays a big role in being able to do that. It's harder to drive a tractor. It's harder to drive your ATV around. It's harder to pick things up from the ground. It's all these different things. But I do what I can do. I have the leg set up. I find whatever tool I need to make me or help me be able to do. I just figure it out, because the fact of the matter is I want to do it, and I need to be able to do it to support my wife and do all these things. I have to figure out a way to make it happen. So yes, does it affect me? It makes things harder, but if there's something I need to do, I'm going to do it. So it's the same in that way.
Yeah, well, you just because normally when we're thinking about adaptive athletes, we are looking at a track or, like you said, rowing, or even some of
Yeah.
the footage of your marathons. It's still on asphalt. But the thought of chainsawing and mucking out stables and pushing a wheelbarrow and all these things, it's a completely different way, and it's not something that really gets talked about. What does the rest of life look like for an amputee? Because we see, the sporting highlights and the gym videos and stuff, but we don't see, yeah, I got to go pick cabbages today. What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean it's a different thing to look at, but it's essentially the same philosophy. If I want to go out and row, then well, yeah, I mean I got to figure out a way to get my boat down to the dock. I got to figure out how to get into the boat. I got to figure out what my leg setup for the thing is. If I want to go run, well, hey, I got to figure out a good place for me to run. I got to figure out what legs work for me to run. Same thing with a bike. Got to figure out what legs I got to ride with the bike. How do I do it? Got to learn how to do it. Got to figure it out. But in the end, it's I want to do those things, so I figure out how to make it happen. And so it's less glorious to to talk about how I carry my kids around when we're out at a restaurant, but it's basically the same exact thing, same exact philosophy anyway.
When you said shorties, it reminded me. You and I met, I think it was 2001, I think it was, when One World Trade was first open, and we did the Steven Siller climb.
It wasn't 2001. It was
So not 2001, 2021 is what I meant to say.
2021. Yeah.
Yeah.
Somewhere
So,
around it.
and
Yeah.
it was funny because I brought all my fire gear over. I was getting ready to borrow a set of an air pack from an FDMA firefighter friend. And
Not
got
allowed.
there, and they were like, yeah, no, you can't take any of that stuff because of security. So I ended up doing it in shorts and t-shirt. And you had your shorties on. I think you tried the steps a couple of times, and then you switched to the ones that literally were like pads, and bear crawled 100 and whatever floors that we climbed, which made me feel like an even bigger pussy because I didn't even have my fire gear on. but I mean, it was amazing to watch though.
Yeah, the first couple of times I did that tower climb, I did it in the X4s, and part of the reason I did that was I thought it's what I had to do. I hadn't really thought of a different way. I hadn't done it before, so I didn't have the experience to really think about a different way to do it. Uh, and also, I kind of wanted to do it in those because I kind of saw it as a way for me to learn how to go upstairs better. Because there's a mode in the legs that I was wearing that you do a certain motion with the leg and it goes into like the stair climbing mode, and I wasn't really good at doing that, so I figured the tower climb could be a good way for me to force me how to learn how to do that, because you never know when you're going to be on a subway in New York City and you have to go upstairs and there's all these people around you, so it'd be good to be able to it's just a good skill to have. And then I did that the first couple of times, but then I thought, all right, now that's over, now I want to figure out, well, what is the leg setup that would make me the fastest? Because it always felt really slow. It felt like I could be faster, but I was slowed down by having to do this step over step thing that I was doing. So I'd accomplished what I wanted to accomplish with that. So then I started going, well, how can I be the fastest I can be? And really what I realized was that in order to climb all these stairs, I didn't actually need the legs. I could just put on these legs that I use for jujitsu and squatting, which doesn't have any prosthetic component to it. It's just a socket with like you said, pads on the bottom. I just walk on that, and like you said, bear crawl essentially up the steps, and it was probably a good 25 to 30 minutes faster. And so that's, I think that was maybe when you joined us, it was the first or second year that I tried that and worked out a lot better.
Yeah, no, you flew up there. It was amazing.
So yeah, it's just figuring out the tools, the situation that facilitate you to be the best version of whatever you're trying to do.
Speaking of jiu-jitsu, I had Kyle Maynard on the show. He's a quadruple congenital amputee, but he was MMA jiu-jitsu. And then Mark Ormrod, triple amputee, he does jiu-jitsu as well. Have you got to roll with fellow amputees and see what the pros and cons are for all the different limb losses?
I haven't rolled with any. The first time I ever rolled, I was at Jocko's gym, and I'd never done any jiu-jitsu before, and he had me roll with a guy that was missing his hand. I forget what his name was. That's the only time I've ever rolled with another amputee. That being said, my brother from Afghanistan, Dowdell, he's a black belt. He's a double above knee amputee too. So I ask him from time to time. I'll send him a text and go, what do you like to do for side control? What do you like to do for guard? What do you like to do for this? And he'll send me a video and give me some tips. But really, I mean, my professor, my jiu-jitsu professor, Professor Charles, I ask him a question, he gives me probably just as good advice because he's just that experienced and he can do it. So and again, it's just use the stuff that works. Don't use the stuff that doesn't work for you. Like I'm not really going to be able to do a thing where I hook somebody's leg with my ankle because I don't do a closed guard because I literally can't do it. And so just don't bother with it. Just do what works for you. But no, I haven't rolled in with any other amputees. I want to for sure, but I haven't. I only go once a week, but on Saturdays usually because my main focus or my main purpose in doing jiu-jitsu is to get my son to be able to want to do it. And so we go and we do the parents kids class, and then there's an adults class I do right after that. So I usually only do it the one time a week, but I would like to do it more. I just need to figure out the scheduling.
I think Mark and certainly Kyle, and I think I forget his full name now, but there's that wrestler who's like literally congenital again. He's got like his diaphragm and that's about it. It almost stops at his hips. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But when they're first wrestling, everyone's fine just rolling them around, in these competitions. But as they get better, then and only then people start complaining, well, wait a second, it's not fair because, they'd be in this higher weight. It's like, but you were fine when you were killing them before, but now they're getting better and they're beating you. Now you have a problem with the fact that they're lighter without their legs, for example.
Yeah, that's funny. That's just ego, man.
Absolutely.
That's funny.
All right. Before we go to the book, talk to me about your journey into Echelon Front, because I got to meet you again in Orlando a few weeks ago. Got to watch your presentation, which was amazing. Lead me through that path to Jocko and Leif.
Yeah, so I was on Jocko's podcast in 2017, right before the month of marathons. Had me on the podcast, and then afterwards, he had me on again to talk about how it went and everything. And at that point, I had been getting some requests for motivational speaking. And I remember that I just asked him how he books things. And he said, well, Echelon Front is my company. And that's how all my events get booked through them. And then I just said, okay, thanks. And then I didn't really do anything with that information for a while. And I started trying to build out my own motivational speaking career. Took a break from it to run for Congress and all that stuff, and then went back to it. And I remember our good friend Jason Gardner invited me out to Battlefield, which is an event that we do where we go to, it used to be at Gettysburg, they're doing it at Fredericksburg this year, but we go out to a battlefield and we talk about the leadership lessons that happen in the battlefield. And then we do a bunch of group discussion and introspection about how that particular lesson applies to our world. It's an awesome event. And the only thing I really had to talk about at that event was my motivational, family stuff, and then my motivational speaking, challenges. And eventually we got off the bus one time and Leif came up to me and he was asking me about, how I book events. Did I use a speaker's bureau, all these different things. And eventually he said, well, why don't you come over and check out what we're doing at Echelon Front? And at that point I said, well, if you're going to offer me the dream job, then I'm going to say, hell yes. Not only yes, but hell yes. And then, so, followed up with them after Battlefield, and they got me, into the system. And I started just going to events that they had instructors going to. They just had me observe. I would just go and watch and see how it was. And after I watched a few, they asked me, Leif and them asked me, what did you think? Is this something that you think you would want to do? And I went, yes. And then after that, I got set up with a mentor, Steve Ward, and I would just go on a lot of his events, and he would sit down with me and say, all right, this is the keynote. So I want you to build out your keynote. You have to cover these subjects. This is what I want you to build one out. And then, so I sat down and worked on that, crafted that. and watched more keynotes and stuff. And eventually, I briefed my keynote to Steve. I briefed my keynote to Sean and all these other people I was traveling with. They gave me tips. Then eventually, as I got better and better, they started letting me do one thing that we teach, the one 4 or 5 minute talking point or one philosophy that we teach, like a mindset like default aggressive. They would let me do that. And they would evaluate me, give me tips. I would practice more. And eventually, as they got more and more comfortable, they'd let me start taking on more and more of the, of the keynote, until eventually they said, all right, final checkout, do your keynote for us. Did some Q&A. They said, they evaluated me. They said I was good, and then I could start doing keynotes on my own. And it's the same thing for half day, full day workshops. You just get to do more and more of it until eventually they feel comfortable that you're going to be able to go out and represent Echelon Front well, and actually teach what we need to be able to teach. And that process probably took about 6 months, I would say, or a little bit longer than 6 months. And eventually they say, we would like to offer you, the position officially. And now I get to go out. It's the best job ever. I get to go spend time with my friends. I get to go out and I get to help people every time I work. And every time I work, it's, the even better thing. Every time I go out and do an event, I come back a better person, because I'm thinking about extreme ownership, and I'm thinking about leadership. I'm thinking about the laws of combat. And it's impossible to teach all these things and not think about how it applies to myself in ways that I can be better in all these different ways. And so every time I go and work, I get to come back a better person, and very few people get to say that.
When you came off, having spoken in Orlando, I remember you even then were asking for notes on your talk. What are some of the things, the real aha moments for you, as far as that stage presence and that public speaking element that maybe you weren't doing very much earlier in your life?
I don't know if I had a specific, aha moment that really made a bunch of things click into place. I think for me, it was more of a steady, learn a little bit. So the first time I spoke on stage, it was shortly after I was wounded, and I got asked to speak at my my old high school's Veterans Day assembly. And I literally just had a piece of paper that I wrote from, and you could hear my voice cracking and all this different stuff. So that was the first time I really spoke on stage, but it was just consistent, regular practice, and uh, being willing to listen to feedback, and being willing to keep practicing and keep practicing. I think the biggest thing to remember is that there's always something that you can improve on, no matter how good you get. And it's all just these. We could probably do a whole podcast on different aspects of speaking in front of a group, but really there isn't really going to be an aha moment. It's just consistent, regular practice and development and learning from other people, looking up different philosophies on how to speak, different ways of doing things, find the one that resonates with you, practice it, do it with other people, get some feedback, try it again, rewrite things, to think about the things that you're saying. How can I say that in a better way? Just regular, constant improvement is really what it's all about. I didn't have much of an aha moment that I would say that I could really recognize, but it was just that continuous development that got me to where I am now. And a lot of help from a lot of the other instructors that give me advice.
I had Sean Glass on the show. Literally, I just put his episode out yesterday. I think we interviewed about 2 weeks ago. And really interesting, because he had some experience working with first responders through Echelon Front. Have you found yourself working with that group?
Yeah, I've done a decent number of events with first responders. Yeah, okay. They're all awesome. They have the same challenges we all do.
If any, what was some of the myths or things that you didn't understand about that profession until you started working with them specifically?
Ooh, myths. I don't know. I don't know if I really believed in anything that was a myth about first responders. I've had a lot of experience with first responders, to the point that I don't know if I had anything that I would call a myth that got dispelled. What was Sean's?
Well, I don't know if I even asked him that specifically. What I'll ask you next then is, were there any common denominators then, as far as the leadership challenges that you seem to hear from the first responders?
Honestly, it's all there's always going to be, look, what we teach at Echelon Front is leadership is the solution to every problem. And what leadership really breaks down to is the four laws of combat. And every time we work with a team, when they're struggling, they're violating the laws of combat. When they're doing well, they're living up to the laws of combat. And it's the same thing across the board for every single team that we work with, whether it's first responders, businesses, classrooms, individuals, all the same people. It's the same exact thing. And it's just that it manifests itself in different ways that are specific, maybe specific to first responders. Like, first responders, there's a rank structure in first responders that doesn't exist in, like a business or in a nonprofit or something like that. There's command structure of, lieutenants, sergeants, and all these different things. So that makes things a little bit more different uh, than a corporation. But you still got to be able to lead up the chain of command. You still have to build relationships. You still have to do all the same stuff. It's just, it might look a little bit different. But yeah, man, it's really, I don't know that there's anything that is specific to first responders from my experience that I wouldn't say also applies in every other team.
One of the challenges that we have, I'll paint a picture then, is at the moment we are going through an incredibly, horrendous recruitment and retention crisis in the first responder profession. And it's not,
Yeah.
as some suggest, that kids these days don't want to do the job, don't want to work. It's the opposite. Kids these days, the ones that are the right candidates for the military, for the first responders, have access to all this information, and they can ask Google, is it healthy to be a firefighter? And 25 years ago when I came on, when I was looking, at least, we weren't even asking that question. It was just like, how do I become a firefighter? That was the only thing. Now, even though there are so many great things about the profession, people can also see, the understaffing, the overworking, the diseases and mental health issues, et cetera, et cetera. And these are all very preventable issues. If you take the money that's downstream, that's wasted through all things, mismanagement, and you invest in an extra shift, more staffing, that will forge recruitment. People will come back to become firefighters again. So that's how you fix it. And then now these vacancies are filled. People aren't being forced to work overtime, and there's this great healing. But I know a lot of great people in departments that are trying to make change. And it might be a chief, it might be a city or county council member, it might be the union president, is pushing against this. So where I'm seeing, and again, I'm not tarring everyone with the same brush, but this is quite a frequent event, is there are people that are in these positions that enjoy a 40-hour work week, that go home at 5 every night, and they're not advocating for the people that are working 80 hours a week and being told they can't go home to their family. So an absence of moral courage. Talk to me about, if you are, put yourself in that position. You're a passionate firefighter. You have extreme ownership. And I actually put this to Jocko when I interviewed him the first time. You really are living it that way. How are you able to create a movement to maybe navigate a barrier that is in, as you said, a rank or a position that's a lot harder to navigate?
So I would say, especially with first responder and military, yeah, the answer is it's not healthy. Definitely not healthy. You're not doing it for your health. But why? But people still do it. Why do people still keep signing up to be first responders? Why do people sign up to be in the Marine Corps during a war? And here I'll speak from my own experience. I signed up in 2006 to join the Marine Corps in the middle of two wars, knowing and actually wanting to go and fight in one of those wars. And I wasn't doing it for my health. I wasn't doing it because I was going to get paid well. I was doing it because I cared about things more important to me than that. I wanted to go be a part of a brotherhood. I wanted to do something that was meaningful. I wanted to do something that mattered. That's why I joined the Marine Corps during a war. And then when I got in, I got all those things, and it was really hard. And there was a lot of challenging parts of being in the Marine Corps. And I remember when I was in Afghanistan, we had just pushed into a place called Musa Kela. And I'm pretty sure this is kind of in the beginning of my book, but Musa Kela, and I think I tell the story in the book about how I was standing on that hill with all these vehicles around. I was talking to my friend Daniel, and I was talking about all these different, we were drinking well water, so we had basically dysentery. Our guts were messed up. My entire body was covered in sand flea bites and itched, chafing. I felt like I was 80 years old. I felt terrible. And then I said, but I'm the happiest I've ever been in my entire life. And the reason for that was because I was doing something that, like I said, I was doing something that mattered. I was a part of a brotherhood, and I looked around, and at that moment, I decided I want to be in the Marine Corps as long as possible. I want to keep doing this as long as I can. And the reason I decided to stay was because of all the people around me. I looked around at my fellow Marines. That's the reason I wanted to stay. It's because all these people around. And it wasn't because it was, yes, the mission mattered. I love being in the Marine Corps. I love all those things. But it was really because the people around me made all this stuff not feel so bad. They were all going through it with me, and that's what made me want to stay. It was the people I was with. So what I would say is, there's a lot of things that you can't control as a first responder. You can't control what the board of supervisors or the city council decides as your funding, whatever. A lot of the times you don't have tons of control over decisions that your chief makes about various things. You have some, but ultimately, the chief is going to make the decision. What you can do is control who you are as a person and be a person that other people would want to come to work and be around, and would want to keep doing this really tough job because they're doing it, and they're coming in and getting to be with people that they care about, that they love, and that they enjoy being at work with. So that's the number one thing I would say is just be a person that other people want to come to work and work with. And just never forget that it feels like you don't have lots of control, but if you lead effectively and you build good relationships, you execute on the laws of combat, and you take ownership of all the problems in your life, guess what's going to happen is you're going to have more opportunities open up to you, and you can move up the ranks. The more you move up the ranks, the more that mindset that you have is going to move up the ranks, the more influence you're going to get. And then you can really help people, when you have a bigger position of influence. And it's going to take a long time, and it's going to be really hard to do along the way. But if you have that as your goal, if you really want to help firefighters, then you can stick around and you can gain as much influence as you can and get to a point where you have a lot more influence on the lives of firefighters and police officers and paramedics and all first responders.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's the thing is we have that service burning in our heart, but if you're not careful, it gets taken advantage of. And in a lot of the military units now, they have organizations like the Thor 3 program for the Green Berets, where they're taking care of their people and they're forging performance, and they're doing great prehab and rehab and all these other things. And we don't really have that in our profession yet, and I think we can. But so that's the thing is, if you love the men and women to the left and the right of you, you also fight for them to be an environment that allows them to thrive, allows them to go home, allows them to rest and recover. Let's flip it on its head. Now we're talking to that fire chief. And again, I'm not picking on all chiefs, but in this example, that is refusing to acknowledge that there is a problem and refusing to find the courage to actually go to the city or the county and say, look, we need to reallocate funds so that we can be proactive and fix some of this financial bleeding and these health issues that we have. Let's say it's someone who's kind of on the fence. What can we say to them to maybe get them to look in the mirror and reconsider maybe their disconnection with the men and women that they're actually serving under them?
If they're in denial about the fact that there's an issue, that sounds to me like they have closed their mind and they're not willing to let their mind be opened because they don't want to hear the truth. And what I would say is get out there and you got to talk to more people. You have to go out and actually listen to as many people as you can. You got to get out of your office. You got to go down to each firehouse or each, and and look, I'm going to say firefighter terms because you're a firefighter, but this applies obviously to every first responder. I'm not trying to leave anybody out, but you got to get down to the firehouse and you got to talk to people, spend some time with them, see what they're experiencing, and actually listen to them. And the vast majority of the time, they might say something that you don't want to hear, but even though you don't want to hear it, that's the truth. That's what you have to accept, and you have to be able to put your ego aside, and because that's the only way that you're going to be able to help them. And just remember where you came from as well. Remember that you were probably a frontline firefighter at one point. You're thinking all these different things, and how great would it have been if your chief actually listened to you and responded to the things that you needed. Um, so that's what I would say. You have to get out of the office. You have to open up your mind. You have to listen to other people. Put your ego aside so that you can make a change.
Absolutely. Are you guys still planning on doing more roll calls? The musters focus on first responders?
I know that there is a. I don't know about the roll call, but I know that there's a plan in place right now to uh, to try and facilitate more first responder training. I don't exactly know what is in the works with it, but I know that my colleague Danny Ziem is working on something. And I would also say this is something I've been thinking about too. Hey, if you're a first responder organization and you want to do some leadership training, look into Gary Sinise Foundation, look into Leary Firefighters. I know that they will give grants out for first responder training. I don't know if they give out grants for leadership training, but I would definitely apply and see what they say. Talk to our team, get a quote for a workshop or get a keynote or something like that. And if it's outside your budget, go to one of these nonprofits and see if they'll give you a grant.
This is interesting, and I was talking, I think, to Jocko and Jason a long time ago about this. We have promotional exams, and there's prerequisites of a degree program, officer classes, but there's not actual leadership training woven into that. And if you look at it, it's very kind of academic, and you might have someone who's a super respected, firefighter, salt of the earth, walks the walk, but maybe doesn't have that academic framework, but arguably would actually be a better leader than someone who acquired all the papers. So it's definitely a missing piece in our promotional system.
It's a missing piece in a lot of promotional systems. I mean, that you just described basically how most people get promoted is that they're good at their job and they know a lot about their technical skills that they need to have. And then people just assume that because they have the technical skills and technical knowledge that they're also going to be a good leader, but it's two separate things, because leadership is all about human beings. It's about human nature. It's about knowing about human beings and how to work with them better, as opposed to knowing how to put out a fire. That's important. It's important to know. It's important for your lieutenant to know all the stuff that they have to take on that exam. That's vital information. But yeah, you got to know how to work with people as well. And if you're not training that, then you're gonna select people for leadership roles that it's a big question mark as to whether or not they're going to be good leaders. And if you're a firefighter and you're looking to get promoted and there's no requirements for leadership training, that doesn't mean that you can't still do it. It doesn't mean that you can't still learn. You just take it upon yourself and gain influence, then become chief and put in leadership training requirements.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's talk about the book then. So you mentioned about kind of doing little parts. That's kind of how my first book came together. It was blog posts that I put, and then I realized, well, if I start writing more, there will be a book eventually. What made you even put pen to paper the first time, and then talk to me about how that kind of evolved to actually the book that I've got on my desk now?
Man, I don't know what made me start putting pen to paper originally, besides the fact that I would just have thoughts. I would just have a thought. I think that was probably as early as being in physical therapy. I would just have a thought. I've always had, think about it before, I've always had just thoughts pop into my head, like philosophical thoughts. And usually when I was younger, when I was in college, in high school, and early on in the Marine Corps, they would mostly be stand-up comedy jokes that I would think about. Like I watched a lot of stand-up comedy, so I just have a thought about various things. I would hear something on the news, and I would start thinking about it, and it would form itself into a stand-up comedy bit. So I would just write those things down. I would just wrote it down in a notepad, uh, and eventually, I would come back to it and try and flesh it out a little bit. But then in physical therapy, I started having more philosophical life thoughts, and it's the same exact thing. I would just have it, and it would resonate with me, and I didn't want to lose it, because if it made sense, I would have the thought, and I would go, yeah, I like that. That's a good thought to have. And so instead of just letting it disappear into the ether, I would just write it down in a notepad, on my computer. I would just write the thought down. And then if it was something that was really powerful, I would just come back to it eventually, and I would just start typing things up. And part of it too is that I had been asked to speak at, Veterans Day. And so that got me writing a little bit, a speech. And then every now and then I would get asked to talk to a class or something like that. And I would have to figure out something to say to them. So I just started doing that more and more. But I was just having thoughts. And a lot of times, when you're writing about a thought, you have a life experience that kind of goes hand in hand with that thought. So you might, as you're fleshing out that thought, you would write a little bit about your experience that led to it. And then you write about the thought, and then you conclude. I mean, that's kind of how I was doing it. And so I just did that a little bit, not with really the intention of writing a memoir necessarily, but maybe I might want it for a speech one day, or just to have. And then eventually after the Paralympics, I started thinking, well, maybe there's enough here to be in some sort of a book. And also, when you're training for the Paralympics, you train twice a day, and then you have a lot of downtime in between. So you kind of need something to do. And so I started writing. And then also my rowing coach he had written a book called Assault on Lake Casitas. So I really admired him, and I kind of wanted to be like him too. So I wanted to write my own little memoir. But I wasn't really doing it in what I would call a serious fashion at that point. I would just write from time to time. And then, but I didn't start really writing in earnest until that 2020, because I had done a lot of other things since then.
What was that process like for you? A lot of people, when they're writing about their history, that it's very cathartic, but then my own personal experience, sometimes it can just be really freaking hard trying to write a book as well.
It is hard to write a book, dude. I wish I was like Jocko, where I could just easily bust out 1,000 words in an hour or less. I'm not that prolific, but for me, one of the first things I had to do was figure out what my hero's journey was. Because this is a memoir, this isn't like a, how-to book or anything like that. This is a memoir. It's a story. And I remember early on, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was writing a book. I found this book called The Story Grid, because the editor who wrote that book edited my favorite book, which was Gates of Fire. And so I read his book about how to write a story. And there was all this stuff in it that was extremely beneficial to me and extremely informative. Like, every story has a genre. Every genre has certain required scenes that have to be in it in order for that story to be satisfying for the reader. And there's a lot of other stuff, but that's kind of the main part of it. And then also all the effective stories have to follow the hero's journey. So I had to sit back and go, well, what is my life? What is the genre of my story? And what are all these different components of my story? And the challenge with it too was that most fiction books, people just make it up. So they can just have all these, they just have to figure out what it is. But me, I had to reverse engineer it after something that's already happened. So I had to go back and reverse engineer all these different aspects, like who's my antagonist, who's the mentor, who's all these different things, what's this moment. So I had to go back and reverse engineer all that stuff, and that took some figuring out. That took some time to figure out what all those parts were. But once I did, then I could start writing out the scenes that I needed to have and then add scenes in between. But then the writing of the scenes was also hard too, because I was trying to write dialogue and I don't remember exactly what people said in all these different conversations. So I would kind of have to figure out how to write the dialogue in a way that is I didn't remember the words everybody was saying, but what I remembered was the overall feeling of the conversation. What was the result of that conversation? So I tried to craft the words in an interesting way that exemplified that feeling. So that was the hard part for me, and going back and just really trying to remember what was going on and describing it and doing it in a way that was going to be, fun to read for people. It's hard to do.
Stephen Pressfield, who wrote Gates of Fire, wrote a book, and it's fallen out of my head, but it's an incredible book on how to write a book. And he talks about the resistance. The closer you get to being finished with something, the harder it is to complete it. And I've just had that with a website I put together to propose my book becoming into a TV show. And the last few days were a nightmare. They were a pain in the ass. Did you find that same thing? As you got closer to completion, did it seem like it got harder towards the end?
I think the book you're talking about is The War of Art, but he also
Yes.
did another one that's even more about writing books specifically, which I forget the title of, but that's another one that I read. Oh, it's Nobody Wants to Read Your Shit or something like that.
Okay, yeah, The War of Art was the one I was referring to, though, so you nailed it.
Yeah, War of Art is that one, but that's about just pursuing your purpose in life, and then Nobody Wants to Read Your Shit is about writing books.
Okay, I need to get that.
I read that one too.
Too late, though.
I don't know if it got harder towards the end. It definitely got harder in that I was kind of just ready to be done. So that's hard to maintain the same kind of intensity when you've done when it's your fifth draft, and you still need to keep making sure you have an open mind and keep it as fresh as possible. Other hard aspects of it was, I had to chop things out. So being able to let go of certain things and figure out what I needed to keep, that was a challenge for sure. And then also, when you start working with a publisher, there's other people that have an opinion, and so being able to detach from your own perspective on it and this baby that you've created, you spent years making, and being able to truthfully evaluate what those people were saying, and sometimes do what they said, even though it meant going in a different direction than what you might want. But the writing didn't become harder for me, but those other aspects definitely were challenging.
What about catharsis? Did you find any therapeutic element of reliving these stories and putting them on paper?
I didn't find any catharsis in it. I think I had already gotten past it at that point. I'd talked about it enough, done enough interviews, thought about it, all those different things. And I wasn't really a person that required tons of catharsis to begin with. So I don't think it was cathartic for me. And then I was able to let go things I was holding onto. It was cathartic, and then I got to be done with the book that I've been trying to write for all these years. So that was nice. But I don't think it was, particularly therapeutic for me from a psychological level.
And what about mental health? When you were a young man, as you said, you got into the Marines, you fell in love with Marines, you had that trajectory changed, whether you liked it or not. Now you find yourself on the other side, still connected, but not wearing the uniform, not able to serve in that capacity anymore. So, we know the transition can be jarring from people that just simply transition out. They're not even wounded. What has been your mental health journey leading up to today? Have you had some high highs and some low lows? And if so, what have you used to navigate those?
I wouldn't necessarily say that I had low lows. I think the thing that I struggled with the most was I did all these really cool things, but I really struggled to figure out to figure out something that felt like it had a purpose behind it that I really believed in. And so when I was in the Marine Corps, I completely believed in the purpose, which was, go fight terrorists and, take care of your fellow Marines. And then when I retired, the Paralympics was awesome, and I'm so glad I did it. And I had a great rowing partner named Oksana, who's gone on to do really great things. But the whole time I did rowing, I didn't feel like I felt out of place a little bit. And I kind of just knew in the back of my mind that it wasn't going to be a long-term thing for me, because I couldn't figure out what's the greater purpose in this besides I'm going to go and I'm going to win a race and I'm going to, look cool. So I couldn't really, rowing I knew was just going to be limited. It wasn't where I needed to be. And then, so that's kind of why I retired from rowing and went on to the next thing, which was my bike ride across the country. And even during that, I still felt unsettled. I was raising money for veteran charity, sure, but I still felt a little bit unsettled during that. And that was a little bit more confusing. I didn't know why that didn't feel completely fulfilling, because I was raising money for veteran charities. And then also the whole time people would keep asking me to speak. Like I would get into a town and there'd be a reception, and the reception would say, "And now Rob is going to say a few words." And I didn't want to say any words. I just wanted to ride my bike. That's all I was there to do. Ride my bike, and here's my donation link if you want to donate. I don't want to tell you what to do. That's kind of how I saw it. And then I tried to make the Paralympics again for triathlon, and didn't work out. But I kind of realized shortly after that, after I quit on that, what was going on at the end of the bike ride. And it was that I had been denying this intrinsic need that I had and that all people have, which is to be a leader. The intrinsic need to lead, as my boss Dave Burke wrote about in his book. So we all have the need to lead, and that's what I realized. That's why both those things didn't feel fulfilling. Is because I wasn't leading. I was actually denying the opportunity and the call to lead. And when I realized that, I kind of realized that at the same time as I recognized this whole thing I write about in the book about how I just noticed that every veteran, it seemed like the perception of veterans had been shifting from being strong heroes to broken heroes. I don't know if you can name me a movie where when the veteran gets home from war, they're not crazy or they're not on the cusp of implosion. It just doesn't exist. Or every veteran character's 1,000-yard stare, every single one. And I didn't like how that was the perception that was starting to formulate around veterans, even if it came from kind of a good place. I didn't like it because it didn't represent me and it didn't represent the vast majority of my friends or the vast majority of veterans. And so I saw that issue. I recognized that I had an intrinsic need to lead and I wasn't doing it. And then the month of marathons popped into my head, or just, the idea of running a bunch of marathons popped into my head, and it clicked. And I'm like, that's what I got to do. I have to take ownership of this problem. I have to lead. And it's going to be even better because I get to do it in a way that really resonates with me, that I enjoy, which is these big endurance challenges, pushing myself to the absolute limit. And if I run all these marathons, I can just put a story about how it's not necessarily a guarantee that you're just going to go experience war and then become a basket case.
Absolutely. With that being said, because I think this is the same with the first responder profession, I've actually been talking a lot recently about reframing this whole conversation. If we're going to talk about first responder physical or mental health, let's talk about performance. Because even if someone is struggling, it's actually the same tools. If you want to be in a flow state in a firefight, if I want to be in a flow state looking for a child in a second floor bedroom, I need to have that calm mind. I need to have a fit body. So, framing it differently and giving the hope, because, this is the same with medical retirement. Well, I've got 100% disability, but I'm not allowed to have a job now. There's a guy trying to take pictures of me if I pick my kid up, et cetera, et cetera. It is a very destructive way of looking at it. So I think, that reframing it with, the post-traumatic growth, the you 2.0 after the stuff that you've been through and working through it, whether it's rehabbing a back injury or working through mental trauma, the excitement that the other side of this is, and you're a perfect example, Rob, in 2026, now all of a sudden you've got that person that was just blown up, has that to look forward to, has that to aim for, rather than, like you said, the kind of, born on the 4th of July, Captain Don Vietnam vet that you were presented with.
Yeah, I mean, post-traumatic growth, post-traumatic leadership. You know what I mean? that's what we're really trying to do, not just grow, but also lead other people. Because even when I tell the story about the hat, the pirate hat, when I first got out back home, even then, I wasn't actively saying, "Oh, I need to lead in this situation." I was just thinking about how I could help other people. I was thinking about how I could help my mom. But that's leadership. How can you support the team? How can you support the people that you care about? That is leadership. That's what cover and move is. That's the fundamental thing that we teach about teamwork. About it's the most fundamental thing in leadership is how can I help the team? And you can help people even when you have been traumatized by something. There's always something that you can do. I say this in my mustard brief. There's always something that you can do to help the people around you, to help the people that you care about. That is what facilitates growth, and that is what leadership is all about. It's so yeah, post traumatic leadership, and at the same time too, I don't want to necessarily. I'm not trying to say that there aren't people that do legitimately struggle from traumatic events. It does happen. The With the month of marathons, I just wanted to point out to people that that's not the only thing. It's not the only possibility. In fact, the vast majority of the time, it's not what happens. So I just wanted to make sure that people were aware that there are two sides. There are two things that can happen. There's more than one thing. It's not just war, traumatized, broken individual.
Yeah. Well, even, I mean, I've heard so many VA stories when it comes to mental health and the tools that are being given, not saying that the people in the system don't have good intentions, but the system itself, it's prescribing meds, it's talk therapy at best, and then we've got, psychedelics and equine therapy and things over here that are working really well. And it's, it's getting people to have the hope that they can heal, because a number of times I've heard on the fire service side, the kind of EAP Russian roulette, we call it, where they're given a generic list of therapists and they go and they sit with them, and the therapist is in tears and they say they can't help them, and they walk out, and some of them got to tell me on the show how many didn't, because that was the final nail in the coffin. So by giving hope, even if people are struggling, it's like everyone's holding on to a piece of rope. The good end, people are doing really well. On the bad end, people are really struggling. But if you pull the rope, everyone moves the right direction, including the one who's almost in the pit. So whereas if it's a doom and gloom, shoulder shrugging conversation, then, there's a lot of people that are going to fall through the cracks.
Yeah, well, I mean, the more people hear about veterans or first responders that overcome trauma, the more people will believe it's possible for people they know and for themselves. And then when they find out about the story, they can go, well, what did that guy do? That's why so many people can overcome, alcoholism and drug addiction, all these things, because tons of people have done it, and they've created a program called Alcoholics Anonymous that has a step-by-step program that you can follow. And so, yeah, if you are struggling with that kind of thing, you need to take ownership of making sure that you get healed. And one of the ways you can do that is to go see what other people have done. And the more stories like, mine and like people that have overcome things, the more stories like that get out there, the more hope people will have. And if you believe that you can make it happen, then you're going to keep trying until you make it happen. And it's really awesome that even though there's these, it's awesome to see that even though there are these gaps in coverage with the VA and with first responder, I guess government organizations that are responsible for, ongoing what disability compensation for first responders. I don't know if it probably doesn't exactly work the same way as the military, but that kind of thing. Even though there are gaps there, there's all sorts of people that are taking ownership of filling those gaps, like non-veteran nonprofits like Semper Fi Fund or Tunnel to Towers that we met at. There's people that are filling those gaps. There's people that are sending people down to whatever Mexico or wherever they're going to do psychedelic treatment. So there's people that are taking ownership of that and making it happen, even though we have roadblocks in the way. And that's what taking ownership is all about. Is just figuring out how to make it happen.
Well, that's a perfect segue for the last thing I want to talk about before we go to some closing questions. Classic example, I've talked about this a lot. Purdue Pharma, OxyContin, FDA-approved drug, caused the opioid crisis that's still killing 100,000 Americans today. MDMA-led psychotherapy, recently they tried to get it through and the FDA denied it. So with that lens and shifting it slightly, knowing that there are a lot of people that make a lot of money when Americans are sick. Drug companies, surgical implants, and then the things that make them sick, fast food, etc. And so the question is, where's the checks and balances for really forging physical health in the US? We've seen PE programs disappear, shit food served in schools, etc. Shifting that to the military side and the moral injury, especially of a lot of our vets, the way that Afghanistan ended, and some of the information about Iraq, after the fact, was it actually correct that some of these young men and women were sent there in the first place? The responsibility of when we send our children to war is a very important concept. But if there are companies, the industrial military complex, that make trillions of dollars when we are at war, then where are those checks and balances to make sure that we only go to war? Obviously, World War II is a good example, when absolutely necessary. So as a veteran who's obviously very, very vested in this whole thing, king for a day again, what have we got to change to make sure that our children aren't dragged into a conflict that we should never have been to in the first place?
Oh man, you're asking me to solve one of the most complex issues in the entire world. If I was king, if I could wave a magic wand, I would just have everybody get along, and not. I would just eliminate the need for war entirely. But I don't think even a king. That's something that only God Himself could do. That's a tough question, but I also still think that from our perspective, the people that send people to war are the ones that are in charge of the military, and so the way that we affect that is be more involved, just like we talked about in the very, very beginning. Vote for people that you don't think are gonna be apt to send us into war, and if they do, then you got to vote them out. You got to use your voice to try and select the people that are going to be responsible with that. Just take ownership of what you can in that, because I don't think there's really a simple answer to that question, because there's so many different layers to it. But do it. Just figure out what you can do to spend time with your own kids and raise them up to be good people. If everybody did that would go a long way to help them with this issue. But it's just take extreme ownership of everything in your life, really. If everybody raised their kids up to be good people, we're going to be a lot less likely to have to go to war. So I would just do the same exact thing pretty much that I did earlier, and that's just be more involved, take more ownership of everything in your world. Put aside Netflix, read a book, spend more time with your kids, figure out how to teach them better, figure out the moral lessons that you need them to learn, figure out how you can do that. All these different things. Just stop being distracted and get more involved, so that we can all hopefully live in peace.
I agree.
Yeah, man, that's a big question.
No, but you say it's complicated, but it's actually not. It's fundamentally very simple what we need to do. And again, we're talking about humanity as a whole, but it goes back to what we were talking as well. If there are companies that are paying people to become president, and they make weapons and uniforms and MREs, and rebuilding infrastructure and bases, then that's an issue. So raising good people and having a political system that you can't buy your way into, left, right, whatever. It's an important conversation, because it's not their children that we send to war ever, so I think it's an important perspective. But who am I to have this conversation? That's why I always ask the veterans. They're the ones out there. They're the ones that have this. I really like Sebastian Junger in Tribe wrote about the Iroquois, and they had a leader for peacetime and a different leader for wartime. And usually the leader, I think, from the peacetime was female, and then the wartime leader was male. And I love that concept. You have a diplomat, you avoid war at all costs, and then if, God forbid, it's unavoidable, then you go all in and you support the warriors fully.
Yeah, that's the ideal. It's as a last resort, for sure. but how do you make that happen? It's when you have all sorts of different incentives and things occurring like that. I mean, really, it's just you got to control the things that you control that are around you, which is your family, your role, the things that you do, what you choose to do with your time, and if you want to affect that issue, do all that stuff in a way that helps with that particular thing.
Absolutely. All right. Well, shifting to some closing questions. We talked about your book, Put Your Legs On. Is there a book
Mm-hmm.
written by someone else that you love to recommend? It can be related to our discussion today or completely unrelated.
Well, I mean, my obvious answer, considering I work for Echelon Front, is obviously going to be Extreme Ownership: The Dichotomy of Leadership, Need to Lead, written by Jocko Leif and Dave Burke. So definitely read all those three books. But I'll give you something a little bit different. There's so many books that I've read. One of my favorite books is Skeletons on the Sahara. Have you ever read Endurance, Shackleton?
I own it. I just haven't had the time to read it yet because I'm finishing up.
A lot of people have read Endurance, but this book, Skeletons on the Sahara, is it's like that, but it's in the desert. So, this ship crash lands on Western Africa. They get taken as slaves, and it's just about how the captain of the ship and all the other people. Well, it's about how they all survive, but the captain of the ship is trying to figure out how he can get his crew back to America, and he strikes a deal with this guy, gets himself bought, and then he just convinces this guy. I won't ruin the entire story, but it convinces this guy that just bought him that if you get me to the consulate in, I forget the name of the town, if you get me to the consulate in Northern Africa, that the guy's my friend, and he'll pay you he'll buy us from you. And he has no idea who the person is. He's never met the guy before. And the whole time, the guy that bought the captain is sitting there going, if this is a lie, I'm going to kill you and your friends. And he's like, nope, it's true. He's my best friend. He'll buy us. Then they get to right outside the town, and the guy goes, write me a letter, or give me a letter to your friend, and I'm going to go and let him know what happens, and we'll see if he pays you. If it turns out it's a lie, I'm going to slit your throat. And there isn't even an American consulate. It's a British consulate. So he just writes a letter to the British consulate. Hey, we've never met. This is what happened. Please buy us. I'm sure the American government will pay you back. And he takes a letter, and the guy reads the letter, and he goes, all right, we'll buy you. And then, he buys all the guys that are with the captain. And then most of them go home, but the captain stays and continues to go out and try and find more and more of his crew. So it's just a really good example of leadership, of sacrifice, and really just a really good example of the things that human beings can endure.
It sounds
and still
amazing.
Come out the other side.
I love stories where the British are the good guys too.
Yeah, definitely the good guys in that one for sure.
All right. What about film, television, or documentaries?
Well, the obvious answers for television is going to be the Band of Brothers, the Pacific. I'm a big comedy guy. I like to laugh a lot, So anything that's a comedy, I think would be my go-to. I just like to laugh.
You started writing stand-up jokes when you were young. Now you've been taught how to be a professional speaker. Has there been any idea at all of maybe pursuing stand-up as an actual profession?
I was pursuing it somewhat in 2017. I was living in Vienna, Virginia, and I was going into DC for open mics, and that was my plan. I was gonna I was really trying. I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to go be a stand-up comedian. But then I also had the idea for the month of marathons, and over time I realized that those two things were kind of antithesis to each other, because in order to be prepared for the month of marathons, I had to train physically and have a really good, a very healthy body. And doing stand-up comedy, I kind of figured I had to be up all night, and I didn't really feel like that was going to be conducive to training. So I decided just to do the one thing. And then I did the month of marathons, and that kind of led to the speaking, and so that kind of led me in that direction. That being said, I use my sense of humor all the time in the workshops I teach. So there's a huge component of laughter, of humor, of just having a fun time and enjoying yourself when I teach a keynote or when I do a workshop. I am able to scratch that that funny bone a lot during workshops, and I think it's really effective. I think one of the most effective things you can do to build a relationship with somebody quickly is to make them laugh, because there's a little bit of awkwardness whenever you first meet somebody, and if you can make this person laugh, basically what's happening is, well, they like you because people like people that make them laugh, but at the same time, you said a joke, they laughed at it, you kind of just work together on something. You work together to overcome this little bit of awkwardness, and now you're kind of good friends. A good example of this is when you're in the elevator with somebody, you can just stand there and both stare at the wall, or you could crack a joke about how the elevator sucks or something, and the other person laughs, and now it's not awkward anymore. Now you're talking to each other. So I think humor and laughter go a long way to building a quick relationship, and that's very important when you're a leadership instructor, because you're getting up in front of an audience that has no idea who you are, and you have to develop a rapport with them very quickly. So I think being funny is a really good way to make that happen in a limited sense.
Brilliant. That makes perfect sense. All right. Well, next question. Is there a person that you recommend to come on this podcast as a guest to speak to the first responders, military, and associated professions of the world?
Yeah, I mean, you had Danny on yet? Danny Ziem?
I have not, no. And when you mentioned it earlier, I was like, I probably need to get Danny on if he's the firefighter in Echelon Front.
Man, yeah, I mean, I think he'd be great. I think Danny would be great. There's a lot of people I could recommend, I guess. I mean, but that'd be especially since it's first responders that we're talking about. I mean, if you get Joe Rogan on, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, he's coming on tomorrow.
Yeah, if you get Sean Ryan, all these people. No, I think Danny would be a great guest for you to have on too, and I'll let him know that I suggested you.
Brilliant.
Or suggested him.
What about Oksana? I think I came across.
Yeah, she'd be a great guest.
Because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think she was in the documentary The Weight of Gold as well, talking about the mental health side of that. I might be wrong though, but I've been following her for quite a long time. So are you still in contact with her? Because she'd be another great person to get on, I think.
Yeah, I've got her. Well, I have what used to be her phone number, unless she's changed it. But yeah, she wrote her own memoir called The Hard Parts, which is very powerful, very very impactful memoir. So got yours truly in it. A little bit of a different perspective, her perspective on what I was like back then, which is always interesting.
What's the discrepancy?
I don't know. I don't know if there was a discrepancy. There's a discrepancy from what I remember myself being like. That doesn't mean that it's wrong, though. It's just not how I remember it. I think I was a little bit more. I wasn't the most open individual at that point in my life, but I think I was portrayed as a little bit more, a little bit colder, a little bit more standoffish than I remember being. But again, that doesn't mean that it was wrong, because it's her memoir, it's her perspective, and I only remember things from my perspective. So she could very well be 100% accurate.
Yeah, or the publisher or the editor is like, yeah, you know what, Rob seems so friendly in this, we're going to change it.
Yeah, I was definitely a little bit more standoffish than I would be right now, because just got out of the Marine Corps. All my friends were Marines. I didn't want to be a part of a different team. And that was part of my problem in rowing. That's something that I could have done a lot better, was be a better teammate to her. So that's one of my own failures from all this stuff, was that I could have been a lot better of a teammate. That being said, I don't remember being quite as cold as, in her memoir. But I'm not, it's I could very well be wrong. It's just her perspective and it's my perspective. And I can only write about what I remember.
Yeah. All right. Well, the last area before we go to where people can find your book and reach out to you, what do you do to decompress?
What do I do to decompress? I find that, working out decompresses me because I get to go in the gym and just listen to some music or listen to a podcast and just focus on that for a while. When I'm out on a run, I'll have a lot of really good thoughts when I'm out running. I'll going out there with something in my mind, and sometimes I'll think of something, I'll stop it, I'll type it into my little, note thing on my phone. My wife and I will sit down and watch a movie on the weekends. Just getting outside, just spending some quality time with the family is decompressing as well. Camping, that kind of stuff.
Brilliant. All right. So firstly, where can people find Put Your Legs On? And then talk to me about the speaking side as well.
Yeah. Put Your Legs On is on Amazon. If you want a signed copy, you have to reach out to me, maybe on Instagram at Rob Jones Journey. Let me know. I will sign. I have a stack of about 75 books behind me. I'll sign one of them and I'll send it out to you. So that's how you get a signed one. Instagram is at Rob Jones Journey. LinkedIn is at Rob Jones Journey. And then if you are interested in leadership training from me or from one of the amazing instructors at Echelon Front, that is echelonfront.com. Instagram is at Echelon Front. LinkedIn, same thing.
Brilliant. Well, I want to thank you again. The first time, obviously, we led through, a lot of the things that we've kind of skirted over this time, but such an incredible conversation. But to revisit and then, get a little bit more philosophical about your journey and some of your perspectives and what you're doing now has been amazing. So I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Thanks, James. Appreciate it, brother.